Looks like 2 minutes is up, so let's start. So welcome to lesson 5, Introduction to Web Development. Today we're just going to cover a little bit more CSS, specifically text manipulation. And before we start, just an update. I did post these slides on the classroom, so if you want to follow along on those slides, you can do that. That way, if you need to go back to a different slide, you can go back on your own. So let's start. So last lesson, we learned several things. Remember, I think the most important thing we learned is block and inline elements. So block elements, including like the P element, the H1 through H6, that kind of stuff. Block elements always start on a new line and take the whole length available on the screen. And then inline elements like span or the bold italicized tags, inline elements are elements that don't start on a new line and only take up as much space as needed. And with that, we learned the two organizational elements, div and span. Div is, remember, is a block element. And so we use it to group together different elements into sections that we can easily edit together. And span is an inline element. So we use it to target specific parts of an element, like specific words in a text. And then we also learned the CSS box model, which is this diagram here. So basically each element has these parts to it. We have the main content portion, which is like where the text or the image is. We have a little bit of padding directly outside of it, which includes some background color in it. And then we have a border, which is invisible, but we can make it solid and we can see it sometimes if we edit it. And then outside we have a margin, which is a transparent space that separates elements and gives a little bit more space between elements. So this lesson, we'll learn how to edit some text in CSS. So changing fonts, doing different text align, styling fonts, making it bigger, smaller, and then making a button or link. And then we'll also learn a concept called semantic markup. So before we start, last homework, thank you to the people who turned it in. These are just 2 examples of screenshots that I took from websites, and they look pretty good. As always, I blanked out the names and information for privacy issues, but this one, I like how they separated the different sections and made it much more colorful than just black and white. And you can see they edited the borders and the padding and background colors. This next one is pretty good too. This person didn't put their real name, so but I really like this website. It's also very colorful, and they have a background image for here, and yeah, it's pretty colorful and looks good for just HTML and CSS. Okay, so let's start. So let's cover what we already know about editing text in CSS. Remember, a few lessons ago, we covered how to change the color of text. So using the color property, we can change the color of text. And then we can also use the background color property to change the color of an element's background. And then we can use the text alignment property to align the text to the left, to the right, or center align it. And if we go to my example here, and you guys can just open up your REPLs if you didn't, we did center this text and stuff. Actually, we centered the whole thing. Yeah, so that's, we learned about that. So let's cover some new stuff. So firstly, we know that you can left, right, and center text align your text. Another option is to justify your text. So text align justify basically makes it so that your left and right sides, the words end and start on the same line. So it's not uneven. And I'll show you an example of how it works very soon. But you would see this kind of stuff, for example, in magazines or in books. If you look at the text, it's often on the same starting line and ending the same vertical line, which makes it look better. And how it works is basically it calculates the number of words in each line and the number of spaces needed, and then compares it to the rest of the lines. And then based on that, it'll calculate a space, how big the space should be between each word, so that each line starts and ends on the same vertical line. So if we go to our REPLs, let's say I wanted to text align this text, right? Right now it's center aligned, but it's a little bit not uneven and not neat. So to demonstrate how justify works, let's target it. Let's give it an ID, and I'll call it justified text. And then if we go into our CSS here, and then we can make the text align, justify. And if you run it, you'll notice that now the text is even on both sides, except for the last line. So it does it for all of the lines except for the last line. And so, yeah, that's, and let me just redo it. Let me just cut it out, and you can see the difference. Before it was centered, so it's uneven. Now it's justified, so both sides are even. Now, you might wonder, what if I wanted the last line to be centered? Right now, the last line is left justified, even though everything else is justified. So how do you do the text align for the last line? Well, what you do is text align last, and then let's say center. This basically gives us a text align value for the last line, because the last line might be shorter than usual. We also have another property for text called text transform. Basically, this just makes, you can use it to make your text either all uppercase or all lowercase, or you can make it so that it capitalizes the first letter of each word. So if you see in this example here, the first paragraph here, we have the text transform property set to uppercase. So it makes this whole text, regardless of what the case value is, it makes it all uppercase. Next, we have text transform lowercase, which obviously makes everything lowercase, regardless of what the case is in the input. And then thirdly, we have text transform capitalize, which capitalizes the first letter of each word. So if we go back to my REPL, I'll show you an example, justified text. Form, and let's say we wanted the whole thing to be uppercase, and now you see the text, every single letter of the text is uppercase. Same thing for lowercase and capitalize. And that brings up a good question. Somebody asked, Why don't you just type it like that? And I have a slide to answer that. First of all, one reason is if you're doing legal documents and you have to, legal documents are usually in all caps. So if you have to copy and paste a portion of text into your website, that needs to be all uppercase, and you don't want to like retype it and have it all of it uppercase. Then you could just use text transform to turn it into all caps or all lowercase. And second of all, in a lot of websites, like for example, this is a Costco website, you'll notice that by default, all of the words are always first letter capitalized. And what you can do is if you go into your body selector here, you can make the text transform by default, you can switch it to capitalize each first letter of each word. So then you don't need to keep on worrying about that throughout your website. And thirdly, let's say you're copying and pasting a large body of text into your website. And like I said before, if you needed it to be all caps or all lowercase or capitalized first letters, you could do that. And you might think it's a little bit unnecessary. And to be honest, it is a little bit unnecessary if you're typing all of your content, but it just gives you that extra customizability if you want for different purposes. So next, let's talk about text indent. So basically, text indent just allows you to customize the size of the indentation of the first line. So if we go to our example here, right now, the first line just starts like that. If in some case you wanted the first line to be larger, the indent to be longer or something, you can use the text indent. And then you can input a pixel value, so 50 pixels, and then it will create an indentation of 50 pixels. And obviously you can make it bigger or smaller for if you want. 100 pixels is bigger, 10 pixels is smaller. And like I said before, a lot of these things might not seem very useful right now, at least. And in truth, like you probably won't use them on a day-to-day basis, but HTML has these extra features to give you a little bit more extra customizability for your websites. And that also comes to a point where I want to say that like when you're doing like professional website development, or when you're actually creating a website for like a business, or you want to create a website for your own business, usually you won't just go and write all the HTML and CSS and JavaScript from scratch. Usually you'll like buy or use a free template that you find online, and then you can edit that template to for your needs. So you still need a knowledge of HTML and CSS because you have to edit the template so that you can make it customized, but you're not going to be writing the whole thing out from scratch. Yeah, okay, so let's go to the next slide. Next is something important. So let's talk about switching the fonts. So by default, there is a method in HTML and CSS to change the font, but it's pretty complicated, and it's like very limited in its customizability and inefficient. What happens is whenever you have a reader that's going to your website, they have to, when they're on the web browser and they're looking at your website, if you set it to a font that they don't have downloaded, so you have to download all the fonts onto your computer in order to see it. But if they don't have it downloaded, then that font won't show. So you have to put in backup fonts, and it's inconvenient, and it's really it's pretty limited. So therefore, we'll use a more easier way to import fonts, which is the Google Fonts API. So basically, Google just made this API, which has a list of fonts online that you can use for free, and you don't need to pay any money for the fonts or have any licensing. And so you can use their fonts on your website, and it's a much easier way to import fonts. And they have over 900 fonts that you can use, which is pretty convenient. So how do you import some fonts from Google, right? First thing you need to do is you need to copy this link, this entire line, into your code. And if you're on this presentation right now, you should be able to copy and paste this into your code. And you copy and paste it in your head section right underneath your CSS link element. And then from here, how do you import the fonts? Well, basically what you can do is if you go to this website here, and there's over 900 fonts that you can use, but this is a whole list of fonts that they have that you can import. And then you just choose a font, and what you do is in here, in these font spaces, you just type in the font that you want. In my case, I'll import the Ranchers font. And then so that's how you can import one font. If you want to import more than one font, what you can do is, if you have this vertical line thingy, which is the button that's directly above the Enter button on your keyboard, and you Shift hold and you click that button, it'll have this vertical line thingy. And if you do that, you can import multiple fonts. So there's another font that I want to import, which is called Open Sans. And then so basically you can import unlimited fonts that way. You can keep on adding fonts using this bar here. But the reason why, you might be asking, like, why can't we just find out a way to import all the fonts so we can use all the fonts on our web page? Well, the truth is, like, in functional web development, good websites usually have probably no more than 3 different fonts on their website. They usually stick with like just a style that has 3 different fonts or less than that, and they just stick to those 3 fonts. So at most, you're just going to be importing 3 fonts. Yeah, so that's just about practicality. Second, notice something. When you're importing the font and you're typing the font into this link, if you have a font like Open Sans that has 2 words, that's made up of 2 words, instead of having a space there, what you want to do is you want to have a plus sign in between them if it's 2 words long. Yeah, so that's how you import fonts. I've imported 2 fonts, this font and this font here. And I'm looking at the comments. It seems like some people still have problems getting this straight line down. So I'll repeat myself again. There's a button directly above the Enter sign, the Enter button, that has that straight line down. What you have to do is you have to hold Shift while clicking that button that's directly above the Enter sign to get that line. So again, the button that's directly above the Enter sign, you have to hold Shift and then click it to get that line. And another question, is it that symbol? Yes, that is a line. It's just a vertical line. So now we've imported the fonts that we've wanted. How do you utilize it? You do that with the font family property in CSS. So let's say So let's say I wanted to make this title here, the Ranchers font. So if I go to where I target this header, which I think is the title section. Yeah, so I'll give this one a unique ID. And then I'll target it up here. Hashtag. Wait, I forgot the name already. Oh, it's just called title. Okay, title, and then we do that. What we can do is we can use the font family property to import the font. And in this case, I'm going to make it Ranchers. Yeah, so, whoopsies. What happened? Hold up. Wait. Okay, so did I spell it wrong? I don't think it's uppercase. Okay. Oh yeah, so the link is case sensitive, so you have to make it uppercase, or based on what it says on the Google Fonts site. And then once you're in the HTML and CSS, the case really doesn't matter. But once you run it, it's a different font. So, okay, so somebody asked me to copy and paste this link in here. Yeah, oh wait, that's to the wrong person. I'll do it to everyone. And to repeat myself, when we're importing the font, if you want to import multiple fonts, you have to have this vertical line separator to separate the different fonts in the link. Yeah. Let's see some questions. So, and then basically you do that, you can use that to change the font for all the text types in HTML. So H1 through H6, P tags, lists, and links. And so, yeah. So somebody asked, how do you make the whole thing one font? What you can do is to target the whole thing, you can just put the font family here into the body selector. And then that'll basically select the whole thing and make all the text that font. Yeah, since I imported 2 fonts, I'm going to use this font also. So I'm going to make that the font of this text here. So that's Open Sans. So and then, I mean, I'm not sure if you can tell the difference, but it's a different font. Also, I forgot to say, when you're doing, when your property value for a font is in 2 words, like this case, you should put these single quotes around them, so that that's just good practice when you're doing that. Yeah. Somebody wants to see my HTML. All right. Okay. So let's move on. So then we have another option, which is font weight. So basically, font weight is just used to make something bold. And then font style is also to used to make something italicized. And then we can use font size to change the size of the text. So that comes to the question where why should you use font weight, font style, and font size to edit text when there's already tags like the bold and italic tag? And that's a great question. So let's talk about a concept called semantic markup. So basically, back when HTML was first released or was first made in 1993, there was no such thing as CSS. So you couldn't edit the styling of the HTML. So what the developers of HTML did is they made a few tags, a few elements like bold, italicize, and the underline elements so that developers that are just using HTML could stylize their text a little bit more. But ever since CSS came out, you can do all of that in CSS. So basically, bold and italics are what you would call like obsolete. So they're still there. You can still use them, but you can do all of that. You can do all the same thing in CSS. And generally speaking, a good practice is to not use the bold and italics tags in HTML because you can do everything in CSS, and after CSS came out, the concept of semantic markup states that you should do all your structural organization in HTML, and you should do only all your design and styling parts in CSS. So you should not use the bold and italics elements in your code. So in this example here, I have this part italicized and this part, this word bolded. So I did that for demonstration purposes before, but now that we know that we should follow the concept of semantic markup, we should change it so that instead of using italics and bold, we should use font style and font weight. And what we're going to do is we're just going to change it to a span, and then I'll do inline CSS here. We're going to make it font style italics. Hold up, I spelled it wrong. And then, oh, I forgot to close it too, span. And then you can see it does the same thing. It's still italics. And same for the bold here. We can just do another inline CSS here. And then I'll close it off. And then it'll do the same thing. So you might be wondering, like, why is it better practice to, instead of using bold and why is it better practice to just write CSS to do the same thing? That comes to our next slide. Why should you use it? And the answer is, firstly, it's better for your organization of code. If you have a lot of like files that you have to work with, then it's probably easier to know that all of your styling edits code is in your CSS files and there's nothing that's in your HTML file that separates, that's not just purely structural. Second, search engine optimization. So this stands, SEO is what this stands for. So if you have a website that you want, like it's a professional website, for example, or if it's a blog or a store or something, you want your website to be on the first page, the first few results of a Google search, right? That's how you get viewers to your website. So the reason why you want to have only structural tags in your HTML is because when the web browser or when the search engine like Google goes through their database of websites, what they'll do is they have specific algorithms that read through your code and see what kind of, how organized your code is. So, so it'll see like if you have H1 tags, H3 or P or whatever. And if you have more of those structural tags and less of those like stylizing tags like I and V, then Google's algorithm will also give you a higher search engine optimization score that it'll use to rank when it's giving the searcher search results. And it's a little bit complicated. Obviously, there's many more factors to search engine optimization, but that's just a short explanation of why we need to use semantic markup. Obviously, when you're just starting off, it doesn't really matter. If you're just learning, it won't really matter. But it's, generally speaking, it's good practice to do all your styling in CSS. Okay, so somebody asked me if I can copy and paste the HTML into the chat. Sure. I'll copy and paste that into the chat if you want it. It's pretty badly organized, but you can just copy and paste that in there. Actually, you know what? What I'll do is at the end of this class, I'll just share this REPL on the classroom so you guys can just use it as an example. Okay, so I think my chat might have been too long. So how about this? We're almost done with our class, and then I'll share the REPL.it with you guys right after class, so you can still use it. So if we go back to our slides, and if we continue, this is the last thing, by the way, so we're almost done. So editing links. So you might be wondering on websites how to like, how do they have buttons, you know, like buttons in this Google Slides website. There's a lot of buttons everywhere and you can click them and stuff. You might be wondering like, how do they do this stuff? Well, the first thing you need to know is how to make a button. So a button is just like a square clickable item, right? And basically a button is just a link that has a more clickable space. So how do you customize a link or a button? Well, you can use what is called a pseudo class to edit the states of an element. So if we go to my example here, let's say I wanted to have a button right underneath the paragraph here. Let's A, and then href equals, what website should I use? And then let's make the link name. And if you look in here, you'll see that the link is here, right? It's just a standard text link. Now let's customize it a little more. Let's make it look a little bit better, and I'll give it an ID. Did I capitalize it? Yeah. Okay. Learn more, and we'll target it using an ID selector. And first, let's make the color a different color. I'll make it let's just say orange. I like that color, orange, right? And now you see the link is orange, right? So it's pretty basic. It's just really just one single color, and it's a link. So how do you turn that into a button? Well, like I said before, we can use pseudo classes to customize the different states of a link. And you'll see very shortly like how this works, but this is a syntax of a pseudo class. We have the selector, like an ID class or element selector, and then we have the pseudo class, basically what the state is of that element. And then we have the CSS inside. So there are 4 states that a hyperlink has. There is the link state, which is the normal unvisited, so unclicked on link. We have a visited state, which means a link that a user has already clicked on. We have the hover state, which is a link when the user mouses over it. So when you hover over a link, you can use that. And then we have the link active state, which is when the second that a link is clicked. And you can edit these states so that you can have different changes, and I'll show you in a second. 2 things though, when you're specifying the CSS for these states, hover must occur after a link and a visited. And second, active must come after the hover state. So if we go to our example here, we have this link here. It's pretty boring. It's pretty static. So let's customize it. Link. Now, when it's in its normal state, it's orange. And then we have the active, or not active. Was it? Oh, visited. And then that's the state when it's after it's clicked, and you'll see what it does. Basically, if you notice when you do a Google search, and let's just do an example Google search right now, animal abuse, right? Notice how the link, when it's unclicked, it's blue. So let's say we click it, and then we reload the page. Now the link is purple. So that's what happens to the link after it's clicked. So that's basically what the visited state edits. So once the link has been visited, you'll notice that the link turns purple. And I think that's by default for all links, that after it's visited, it'll turn purple. As an example, I'll make the color after it's visited blue-violet. And if we go to our website here and you click the link, obviously it's not found because I'm clicking it from the REPL, but you'll see that the link by default turns purple after you click it. So that's basically what the visited state does. And then we have something pretty cool, which is the link when it's hover. And like I said before, what the hover is when you hover your mouse over the link, that's what it customizes. So let's make it so when you hover over it, the link turns aqua. And if you run it, you'll see that whenever you hover the mouse over it, it'll turn a different color. And that's basically how a lot of buttons change color. You know, if you hover over any of these buttons, it'll change a color or background color. And then you can have the active state, which is the second that you're clicking it, and we'll make the active state the color red. And you'll notice that when you're clicking it, it turns red. Yeah, so those are the different states. And to make a button, it's very simple. So what you do is you assign that element a background color and some padding so that you can actually see the button instead of it just being a link. So let's say background color. Actually, I'll make it this green color. Green color. And then if you run it, you'll notice that now the link is pretty ugly, but you can see that the background is green. And to make it look a little better, we'll make the padding a little bit bigger. And if you do that, okay, I'll make the padding slightly bigger. Oh, that's a little bit too big. Maybe like 18 pixels. Still too big. 15 pixels. Okay, so now it looks a little bit better. And now you notice the whole thing, the whole button is green. And then to make it more satisfying to hover over, like right now it looks really bad, but to make it more satisfying, we can when you hover over it, we can make it the background color. Let's say, actually I have a color up here. And then you'll notice when you hover over it, it turns a different color. Okay, I really don't like that color. So I'll change it to this green color when you hover over it. So doing that. And then you'll notice that it changes color when you hover it. It still looks really bad, but I'm not an artist, so my colors aren't really good. But so that's how you make a button, kind of. Now the whole thing is clickable. There's another thing you can do is you can get rid of this underline. So how do you get rid of this underline? You can make, you can set the text decoration, which is another property that deals with underlines, to none. And then you'll notice that if you run it, then there's no underline anymore. And then obviously you can customize it, so you can make it so that if it's and when you're hovering over it, you can make the text decoration underline. So then when you hover it, you'll notice that the text is underlined. And so that's just a basic overview of how buttons are made in CSS and HTML. And basically, next week, we'll learn how to create like a navigation bar, like this kind of thing. And basically, a navigation bar is just like a horizontal list of buttons. And we'll see how to do that next week. So that comes to the end of this class. That's all for today. The homework will be posted shortly. Also, I'll copy and paste I'll share all the code in my example right after class. Can you make links italics? Yeah, you can make links italicized. Like links are just another type of text, so you can bold them, italicize them, underline them. Yeah, but yeah, that's all for today. That's the end of this class today. And then now it's just questions, if you have any questions. Um, okay, so some questions. When are we going to do JavaScript? Yes, so next week's class is going to be the last lesson on HTML and CSS. So hopefully we'll cover some Bootstrap, and we'll also cover how to make nav bars. And then we'll start JavaScript. How do you assign an ID to a link? So an ID, like it's the same way you do to any other element. You just use the ID attribute in the HTML opening tag. In this example, it's here. That's just how you assign an ID. And I'll share my code after class. How do you make the rectangle? So the way you make the rectangle, like this rectangle visible, first you have to assign the element a background color so that the rectangle is visible, right? Second, you need to increase the padding, like I did somewhere here. You have to increase the padding so the background color is like it's a little bit more wider, so the button's a little bit bigger. Yeah, class is over right now, so you can stay if you want to listen to the questions or if you have any questions. I'll share the code for REPL right after class. What is Bootstrap? So Bootstrap is basically a CSS library that we can use so to make our websites better. So like I explained before, when you're doing professional web development and design, usually you don't code everything from scratch. Usually you use a template which is made by like web designers, and then you edit that, customize that template to your website. How to color the link? The same way you change the color on different types of text, you just use the color property. Yeah. Okay, so it seems like there's no more questions left. So I guess we could close the call. Oh, okay. So another person asked, what is Bootstrap? So like I said just now, Bootstrap is just a library for CSS. So they have templates, CSS templates that you can use. Yeah, Ethan, thanks for the suggestion. I mean, you can customize it however you want. the link is not found. So whoever was asking that question, which link? Are you talking about this link? The button? Let's see, I think, yeah, okay, so you have to have HTTP, I forgot the HTTPS, the protocol in front of the www. Yeah. Okay, so I think that's it. See you guys next week.